Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off by just describing how our labs are going to work, what our lab structure is going to be. So essentially, we are using live gear. Okay, now when we did the CCNA, we used a simulator, right? We used Packet Tracer. That was fine. It's a great piece of software, but with Juniper, we're going to be using live gear. So this is going to be completely realistic as to what you would normally do if you were administering devices, okay, or Juniper devices. So, or any kind of network device for that matter. So essentially, we have got live gear sitting in a rack at the ACIT campus. All right, now it's organised into pods. So what we're going to be doing is allocating a group of you to a pod to do your labs. So every pod consists of 2 devices. The device type is called an SRX. Now SRX is a Juniper device. It is primarily a gateway in actual fact. So primarily it's used as a security gateway. That's its primary function. We'll talk a little bit more about it shortly, but there are 2 of them in a pod. Device 1 and device 2. There are 4 pods per rack, and there are 2 racks. So we've got 2 racks of gear. Each rack of gear has got 4 pods. Pod A, Pod B, Pod C, and Pod D. Every pod has got 2 devices in it. Okay, so when you're allocated a pod, you'll be allocated 2 devices for that pod. Okay, now as we go on in our teaching, by the way, there are chairs around the outside too if you run out of chairs in the middle. As we go on with our lessons, the configurations of the pods will be dependent on each other. So for certain things to work, so say for certain labs to work, each device in the pod has to be configured for that particular lab to work. Okay, so we're going to have a situation where if someone hasn't done their particular configuration, then the other device won't be able to interact with it properly to actually do the lab. Okay, so the best way to progress through the labs is that you all do the group that has a particular pod, that you do your labs together simultaneously. So you're all up to the same place at the same time in your labs. Okay, now if you go into the learning portal, you'll see that your labs are actually up there on the learning portal. So just looking at how our labs are going to work, we're going to allocate you to a pod. Your pod will have 2 devices. So one of the devices will be the device that you are configuring, and the other device will be the device that the other people in your team are configuring. Okay, so you need a minimum of 2 people in a team, 2 people per pod. That's the minimum that we need. Okay, now the issue that we've had in the past with that particular concept is that when we have lab day, the other person doesn't show up. Okay, so the first person sitting there going, okay, I'm going to do my labs, my partner's not here, what do I do? And that poses a bit of a problem. Okay, so what I wanted to do to begin with at least is to put 2 people on a device. Okay, so you can work through the labs together, and you can both maybe take turns at configuring it or whatever. Now, or just work together to configure it. Okay, because essentially what we're going to do is going to be logging into these devices and configuring them remotely. Right, that's what we're going to be doing. So now, if you get to the stage where you think, actually, I'd like to be the only person using this device and not share it with anybody else, that is also possible. It just means that we need to allocate a different time slot for you to do that. Okay, so coming back to the basic concept here is we have 2 devices in the pod. We're going to use those to do our labs. So I'm going to be allocating you to a pod, okay, today. That's one of the first things we're going to do. Now, The other thing is that we have got other things in our lab environment as well. We've got this thing called the internet. Now, just so you know, we're not actually going out to the live internet. This is self-contained within our lab environment to simulate the internet. All right? So, we're not relying on anything external. The other thing we've got down here is a management network, and that is in fact our classroom network. So that is our standard classroom network 10.10.40/24 network. Okay, so what we've got is an interface on each of our devices which is connected into our management network and has been configured obviously with a unique IP address for that particular device. So, one way of you connecting into your devices and managing the devices is to go in with a terminal program, and like PuTTY is probably the one that is most commonly used. Who has ever used PuTTY before? Have you used it? Okay, now PuTTY is a terminal program, probably the most commonly used terminal program in the industry. It is free. It is real simple to use, and I'll give you a demonstration of how to do that today. So we'll be using PuTTY to SSH into that particular device. All right, now, apart from that, each of these devices has got a console connection, as you would expect. Okay, now, as you know, the console connection is used typically when you're first configuring a device. You get your laptop, plug it into your console connection, and do your initial configuration on your device. Okay, so you set up your basic IP addresses, etc. Now, every device has obviously got a console connection, but we're not going to walk up physically and plug into the device, but we can still use the console connection. Oops, we've got our console connection attached to a thing which is called an access server. Now, an access server, in this case, is actually a Cisco device, and it's a Cisco device which allows multiple console cables to be plugged into it, and each of those cables goes out and connects to one of our devices in our pods. Okay, so we have got, because we've got 2 racks, we've got 4 devices in each rack, making up, we've got 8 devices in each rack, making up our 4 pods. We've got 16 devices in total. Okay, so we've got 16 console connections to these devices. So your particular device has a mechanism by which you can attach to your device via a console connection. Now, why would you want to do that? Any clues as to why you may want to use a console connection to connect to your device rather than just SSH into your device? Well, here's a scenario for you. What if you were SSH into your device, you're happily going along, and you completely jigger the configuration so that it is no longer accessible from the management network? Okay, so you do something to completely disable connectivity to your device. All right? Disaster. Particularly if you're remote accessing in via the VPN from home, whatever. Okay? Actually, there is a solution that will save your butt. You can connect into an access server. I'm going to show you how to do that. And you can then go in via your console connection and reconfigure your device. Okay, reconfigure it to make it work again. Okay, so that is a great way of connecting. In fact, you might decide, I like this console concept so much, I will always connect using the console cable, and that's fine as well. You can do that. Okay, it's perfectly fine. So the concept of an access server being connected to network devices is a common concept in network management, in that you use your access server, and what your access server does is kind of the back door into your devices to go in and manage your devices if for any reason they lose connectivity to the main network. Okay, so this setup that we're using is a fairly common network management setup. In fact, it's a recommended setup that you do have this this access server that allows you into the console cable to recover your devices, to configure them in any way that you need to. Okay, so what we've talked about so far is the fact that they're connected to a management network, the fact that they're also connected to an access server via console cable, which you will have connectivity to. Now, for the purpose of doing the labs, as we get into sort of more sophisticated labs, there's going to be other components that you will connect to, other routers that you will connect to. Okay. Now, these routers, they're all different. Each of you have got your own little set of routers, which are different from everybody else's set of routers. Okay. Now, if we add it all up, that's a whole lot of routers. So, in actual fact, we don't have lots and lots and lots and lots of routers all sitting in our rack. What we've actually got is one router. So, apart from your 16 devices, each rack has got a separate router sitting in there as well, which is another Juniper router. And what that router has is a whole bunch of virtual routing instances created inside of it. Each one of those looks like and acts like a separate router. Okay, now, we haven't really talked about what these things are, so I'm just sort of, you're hearing about it for the first time. But as we go through our course, you will actually create these virtual routing instances. You'll learn how to create them, you'll learn how they work. They are things that are used in networking, particularly when we get into a little bit more advanced networking. They are used very commonly in more advanced networking scenarios, and we'll talk about why they're used and how they're used and so on. Okay. So we started with the CCNA. The CCNA has been fantastic. We've learned a whole bunch of stuff. Now we're going to learn some more stuff, okay? Stuff that is very commonly used in day-to-day network management, tools that you can use to achieve particular outcomes that you need to achieve. All right, so we've talked about a management interface, we've talked about a console connection, we talked about the fact that as we go on, there's going to be these virtual routers that you'll interact with. They're already configured, they're already there, everything's connected. You just need to follow your labs through and you'll be interacting with them. Okay. So there is a lab environment that is there's a fair bit going on in it. Okay, there's a fair bit going on in this lab environment that you're going to be interacting with and performing a whole range of different network management tasks. Okay, so that's our basic lab environment. I'm going to give you a demonstration of how this works shortly. We are from here accessing it. We're going to be relying on VPN access to access our campus. So I'm going to connect with our VPN, and then I'll do a little demo of how to access the devices, what that looks like. How to use the access server to go on via a console cable, what that looks like. There's a few things that you want to sort of know about when you're using the access server as to how to sort of use it properly. So we'll go in, we'll do a demonstration of that. Now, so let's just talk a little bit about the devices themselves, the Juniper devices. Juniper have a model of device called an SRX. We'll get into sort of Juniper's devices in a little bit more detail as we go on. But the SRX is primarily a security device. It's really designed to be the gateway, the bit that connects you to the outside world. Now, the thing about the SRX, it's just a very, very versatile device. Now, when we did our Cisco course, we talked about the concept of you've got a switch, you've got a router, you've got a gateway. Okay, and each of those are separate things. The thing about the SRX is that it's got a bunch of interfaces on it, and each of those interfaces can be configured to be a switch interface or a router interface, whatever you need it to be. Okay, so it's completely configurable. Is that impossible? Yeah, and that's actually a very practical solution as well. We've got our gateway that we use for our network is a Juniper SRX device. Some of the interfaces are configured as router interfaces. They connect to the internet. And other interfaces are switch interfaces which connect to our internal network. Okay, it works very well. Now, the other interesting thing about the SRX is that it has got two modes that it operates in. And it's useful to be aware of these modes. They're not specifically covered in the course, so I'm going to kind of give you the heads up right from the start about these two modes. One mode is called packet mode, the other mode is called flow mode. Okay, now, what's the difference? Well, flow mode is when the device is in flow mode, it's operating as a gateway, as a firewall. So what it's doing is it's inspecting the packets in a stateful manner. So it's actually doing stateful packet inspection, and in that particular mode, it allows you to implement firewall security policies. Now, in packet mode, it's just a pure router. Okay, it's not a gateway at all. So it just does routing like a router normally would without being a firewall at all, and it's just basically stateless. Okay, so it has these two modes. All right, now, for this part of our course, for this 6 weeks, we are in packet mode. All right, we're in packet mode. We're going to be learning about routing and routing concepts. So we're doing routing, okay? In the next 6 weeks after this block, we'll switch it over to flow mode, and it will become a firewall, a full-blown firewall with all the features of a commercial firewall. And we're going to implement security policies, and we'll be then configuring it as a firewall and implement security policies and VPNs, all the different things that we would want to do with a firewall. Okay, so it's got these two modes. All right, so just so you know, we're in packet mode. If you change from one mode to the other, you have to reboot the device. All right, so basically, and also, if it's in flow mode and you haven't configured it properly, so in other words, if you haven't configured the interfaces with proper security policies, it just doesn't work at all. Okay, nothing. You can't ping it, you can't connect to it, it doesn't connect to anything else. Okay, so basically, to start off with, we're in packet mode, very simple. It's just going to work like a router would normally work. And then once we do the next term, we're doing security, and then we're going to learn about how a firewall works and how the interfaces need to be configured for them to work properly. Okay, so we're going to be getting into that. Alrighty, so far so good. Okay, so let's just take a little break right now. What time is it? Okay, 10:21. We'll take a little break. By the way, the toilets are just around the other side there, around the other side of the room. So we'll take a little break, and on the break, when we come back from the break, we'll set up our VPN. I'll do a little demonstration of logging into the devices, what that looks like, and I just want to show you how to do that. And then we'll start to get into, we'll actually want to then set up the actual classes, your groups, into the various racks. So we'll actually allocate you to your pod at that point, so you'll know what pod you have got. Also want to show you some other things about where to find the configurations on the FTP server, etc. How to save your own configurations if you want to save your own configuration as a custom configuration, how to save it, where to save it, etc. So I just want to show you the organization of the labs and how they work, and give you a little demonstration. After that, then we'll get into looking at start our actual first lesson. Okay, let's take a break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Okay.